The cavern was silent except for the endless sound of ice dripping from the ceiling. In the deep shadows, an alien woman held her daughter close, her arms shaking as she tried to shield the child from the bitter cold. Their breaths came out as thin white clouds, vanishing almost as quickly as they formed. The little girl's eyes were half closed, her lips pale, her body trembling with every shallow breath. The mother whispered softly in her own language, words of comfort that were lies even as she spoke them. She told her daughter they would be fine, that someone would come, that the fire would return. But in her heart, she knew no one was coming. They were trapped in this frozen cavern, abandoned by fate, and the cold was winning. The cavern stretched for miles beneath the surface of a dying world. Above, storms howled with such fury that no ship dared fly. The blizzards had swallowed entire towns, leaving only ruins hidden under the snow. The mother had carried her daughter for hours through this storm, searching for safety, but the cavern she had chosen offered nothing except darkness and ice. Their small fire had burned out long ago. She had used the last of their fuel to keep her daughter alive through the night, but now the flame was gone, and the silence that followed felt like death itself. The child whimpered, her tiny voice almost lost in the frozen air. The mother pulled her closer, wrapping her torn cloak around them both, trying to give warmth she no longer had. Her own strength was fading. She had not eaten in 2 days and her body was weak. Still, she refused to let go. She had promised her daughter she would not let her die alone. If death was coming, they would face it together. Then, something changed. The mother's head snapped up. At first, she thought it was only her imagination, the tricks of a desperate mind. But no, she had heard it clearly. Footsteps, echoes, a rhythm not made by the shifting of ice. Someone was moving through the cavern. The sound was distant, but steady, closer with every heartbeat. Her blood ran colder than the ice around her. Who else could be here? The storms had cut them off from all others. No one should have been able to find them. Fear wrapped itself around her chest. What if it was a predator? The caverns were not empty. Stories were told of shadow beasts that hunted in the dark, feeding on the weak. The mother's heart raced. She pressed her daughter against her chest, ready to defend her even with the last of her strength, but a voice inside her whispered something else, a voice she dared not believe. What if it was a savior? What if, against all reason, someone had come? The footsteps grew louder. She could hear the crunch of heavy boots on the frozen stone. She could see a faint glow moving between the pillars of ice. Light. Actual light. Her heart hammered in her chest, torn between hope and terror. She could not run. Her daughter was too weak. She could not hide. The cavern was too open. All she could do was wait, trembling, as the figure approached. The glow grew brighter. A shape emerged from the shadows. At first, she thought it was a giant beast, tall and broad, but then she saw the outline of a torch, the glow of fire contained inside strange metal. The figure stepped into the cavern fully, and for the first time she saw him clearly. He was not of her people. His face was different, his build strange, his eyes sharp with something she could not describe. His clothes were heavy, built for the storm, and his breath came in clouds that mixed with hers. He carried bags and strange tools, his every step deliberate, as if he had crossed impossible ground to be here. She had heard whispers of his kind. Stories passed through frightened lips in alien markets. They said humans were dangerous, unpredictable, too wild to trust. Some even called them monsters in the skin of men. But in this moment, he did not look like a monster. He looked like fire in the dark. The man stopped a few steps away, his eyes scanning the scene. He saw the mother crouched on the ground, holding the fragile child. His expression changed. His movements grew quicker, sharper, as if he knew time was running out. He knelt, pulling something from his pack. The mother stiffened, unsure whether to trust him, but when he unrolled a strange cloth and wrapped it around the girl, she felt the warmth instantly. The fabric glowed faintly, heat spreading into the child's small body. The girl let out a weak sigh, her trembling easing slightly. The mother's eyes filled with tears. She had no words. She could not even speak his language. But her heart screamed 1,000 thanks. Still, a part of her whispered caution. Why was he here? How had he found them? And what would he want in return? The cavern groaned, a deep rumble echoing through the stone. Shards of ice cracked from the ceiling, falling dangerously close. The storm outside was growing worse, shaking the cavern to its core. The human looked up, his expression grim, then back at the mother and child. He gestured urgently, pointing toward the deeper tunnels. He was telling her they had to move. Now. Her body was weak, her legs unsteady, but when he offered his hand, she took it. She did not know who he was, or why he had come, but she knew one truth. In the moment when death had nearly claimed them, it was not her own people who came. It was him, a human, and somehow, he had arrived just in time. The cavern was colder than any night the mother had ever known, yet in that moment a spark of warmth had entered with the stranger. His torch flickered against the icy walls, throwing long shadows that danced around them like restless spirits. The mother still clutched her daughter tightly, afraid to let go, but her eyes never left the human. He was a mystery. His movements, fast yet careful, his eyes sharp but not cruel. She had never seen his kind before, only heard fearful whispers from travelers. Yet here he was, kneeling in the snow beside her child as though he had been sent by the stars themselves. The man worked quickly. From his pack, he pulled out another strange object, a small metal cylinder that hummed softly when he pressed a button. Warm air spilled out from its vents, fighting back the cold. He placed it near the child, and the ice that clung to her skin began to melt. The little girl's shallow breaths grew deeper, her body no longer shaking as violently. The mother's eyes widened. These were not tools she knew. This was human technology, and it was keeping her daughter alive. But even as she felt hope rising, fear clawed at her heart. Why was he here? No one should have been able to track them through the storm. And yet, this man, this human, had found them. What did he want? The man noticed her fear. He paused, raising his hands slowly, palms open, showing he carried no weapon meant for her. His voice broke the silence at last, deep and steady, words she could not understand. The sound startled her daughter awake, the child blinking up at him weakly before hiding her face against her mother's chest. The mother's grip tightened, her body instinctively shifting between the human and her child. The man did not move closer. Instead, he pointed toward the tunnels that stretched deeper into the cavern, then back toward them. His meaning was clear enough. They could not stay here. The storm outside was too dangerous, the cavern unstable. He wanted them to follow him. The mother's heart pounded. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, yet the fireless darkness offered her nothing but death. The stranger had already saved her daughter once. Could she risk believing in him again? A sudden sound shook the cavern, ice splitting from above, crashing into the ground where they had sat moments earlier. The human reacted instantly, pulling the mother to her feet with surprising strength. He gestured again, urgently this time. The decision was no longer hers to debate. If they remained, they would die here, crushed or frozen. Her legs trembled, her body weak, but she forced herself to stand. Her daughter whimpered softly, still half-conscious, her small arms clinging around her mother's neck. The mother adjusted her hold and nodded, a single sharp motion that told the man she would follow. Relief flickered across his face. Without another word, he turned, leading them through the twisting tunnels, his torch cutting a path through the dark. The journey was slow and brutal. The cavern was a maze of jagged walls and narrow passages, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the silence. The mother stumbled often, her vision blurred from exhaustion, but the human was always there to steady her. Each time she faltered, he caught her before she could fall. Each time she thought she could go no farther, his steady presence pulled her forward. As they walked, she studied him from behind. His shoulders were broad, his step sure as if he had crossed places far more dangerous than this. His torchlight revealed scars on his gloves, burns along his gear, the marks of a man who had faced storms before. He did not look like a traveler, lost by chance. He looked like someone who had chosen to come here. Why? The mother's mind swirled with questions she could not ask. Did he know her people? Did he have enemies here? Or was it simply that humans, reckless as stories claimed, threw themselves into danger without thought? She could not know. She only knew this. Without him, she and her daughter would already be frozen bodies in the dark. The child stirred against her chest, her small hand slipping from the blanket to reach toward the torchlight. The warmth had returned to her, fragile but real. The mother felt tears sting her eyes. For so long, she had prepared herself for death, and now, against reason, life had returned. But hope was fragile in the cavern. More than once the ground shook beneath them, the sound of splitting ice rolling like thunder. At one turn, a massive wall of frost blocked their way, and the mother thought it was the end. But the human knelt, pulled another device from his pack and pressed it against the wall. Heat erupted from the tool, melting a path through solid ice. The smell of burning frost filled the air, steam rising as he worked. The mother watched in stunned silence. This was not a weapon. It was salvation carved from human hands. When the path cleared, he gestured for her to pass first. She hesitated, then stepped through, clutching her daughter tightly. On the other side, the tunnel opened wider, and she could feel faint currents of air, the promise of escape. But just as hope began to bloom, the cavern gave a violent roar. The walls trembled, and a section of the ceiling collapsed behind them, sealing the path they had just taken. The sound was deafening, dust filling the air. The mother screamed, holding her daughter close, convinced the entire cavern would bury them alive. When the noise finally faded, she opened her eyes. The human stood between them and the collapse, his body shielding them from falling ice. His torch still burned, though faint now, and his chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He had not moved for his own safety, only to protect them. In that moment, her fear of him cracked. She still did not know who he was or why he had come, but she knew this: he was no monster. He was a man who had chosen to risk his life for hers. The human looked back at her, eyes steady, and for the first time, she believed they might survive this. The deeper they went into the cavern, the colder the air became. Every breath felt like knives cutting through the mother's chest. Her daughter was wrapped tightly in the strange human blanket, but her small body was still fragile, her skin pale, her breaths uneven. The mother felt panic growing inside her. The warmth had bought them time, but time alone would not save the child. Without real shelter, without more heat, the girl would not last long. The human seemed to understand. His eyes kept flicking toward the child, his jaw set with determination. He quickened his pace, his torchlight moving steadily ahead. But even his face showed strain. His breaths came heavy now, fog curling around him in the cold air. He was strong, stronger than anyone she had ever seen, but even strength had limits. The path was cruel. Sharp ice jutted from the ground, forcing them to step carefully. At times the tunnel narrowed so much that they had to squeeze sideways, the mother afraid she would drop her child in the tight space. Each time, the human reached out with steady hands, guiding her through, his touch firm but careful. Never once did he let them stumble into danger. Still, her fear gnawed at her. Every sound of cracking ice made her heart race. The storm above rumbled like an angry beast, shaking snow into the tunnels. The cavern was alive, and it wanted to bury them. At one point, they reached a chamber where the roof had caved in, blocking their path. The human stopped, scanning the walls with a small device that glowed faint blue. Numbers flashed across the screen. He studied it, then pointed to a narrow opening near the side wall. The mother could barely believe anyone could fit through, but he crouched down and squeezed inside first. Torch gripped tightly in one hand. His body scraped against the ice, sparks falling as his gear struck the walls. For a moment, she thought, he would get stuck. Fear rose in her throat, but then his voice echoed back, calm, steady, beckoning her forward. She had no choice. Holding her daughter close, she crawled into the tight passage, her shoulders scraping painfully against the frozen stone. The child whimpered, pressing her face into her mother's chest. The space felt endless, suffocating. But then a hand reached back through the dark. His hand. She gritted her teeth, grabbed it, and he pulled them through to the other side. The mother collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Her daughter stirred weakly, eyes half opening before closing again. She was fading. The mother's chest ached, knowing the truth. Even if they escaped the cavern, the girl might not survive the night. The human knelt beside them. He pulled a small vial from his pack, filled with a glowing liquid the mother had never seen before. Without hesitation, he held it to the child's lips. She froze, unsure if she should stop him. What if it was poison? What if he was not truly here to save them? But then the child coughed, her throat dry, and the human tilted the vial gently. Drops of the glowing liquid touched her lips, and almost instantly the girl's breathing steadied. Color returned faintly to her cheeks. Her trembling lessened. The mother stared in shock. Whatever this human had given, it was life itself. Tears blurred her vision. She had doubted him, feared him, but each moment proved her wrong. He had no reason to risk himself, yet here he was, saving her child again and again, but safety was still far away. As they continued, the tunnels grew louder. Strange echoes bounced through the ice, not just from the storm but from something else. At first, the mother thought it was her imagination. Then she heard it clearly. Movement. A low growl carried through the dark. Her body stiffened. This was no storm. The human heard it too. He froze, his torchlight steady, his eyes narrowing. He pulled a tool from his belt, a small rod that unfolded with a sharp click. It was not like the weapons she knew, but the way he held it told her what it was. He was ready to fight. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the scrape of claws on stone. The mother's blood ran cold. She had heard stories of the beasts that lived in the deep, creatures that thrived in the cold, feeding on anything trapped inside. They were hunters, and now they had found prey. The human stepped in front of them, shielding her and the child. His torch illuminated the tunnel ahead, and there, from the shadows, a pair of glowing eyes appeared. Then another, and another. The beasts were not alone. The mother clutched her daughter tightly, her heart hammering in her chest. Death had followed them into the cavern. The storm was no longer the only enemy. The human raised his weapon, his stance unshaken. His voice rang out in the dark, a single word she could not understand. But the tone was enough. It was not fear. It was defiance. The beasts advanced slowly, their growls echoing like thunder. The cavern walls trembled under their weight. The mother shut her eyes, whispering one last prayer. But when she opened them again, she saw something she could hardly believe. The human was smiling. The beasts crept forward, their glowing eyes reflecting in the torchlight. The cavern air filled with their low growls, each step crunching against the frozen ground. Their bodies were massive, built of muscle and bone hardened by the cold, their breath steaming in the air like smoke from a furnace. The mother's hands shook as she held her daughter tight against her chest. She had survived the storm, survived the collapse, but this was different. This was death with teeth and claws. The human did not move back. He stood firm between the beasts and the mother, his figure casting a long shadow across the ice. His torch burned weakly now, but his eyes burned brighter, filled with a fire the beast did not understand. He raised the strange rod in his hands, and with a sharp motion, it came alive. Blue light snapped across its length, crackling with energy. The sound echoed like thunder bouncing through the cavern. The beasts halted, their eyes narrowing, their growls deepening. They had not expected prey to fight back. The first beast lunged. Its roar shook the cavern, its claws reaching to tear him apart. The human swung the weapon upward, and the crackling blue light struck the beast's chest. The smell of burning flesh filled the air as the creature screamed, collapsing against the ground, writhing in pain before going still. The mother gasped. She had never seen such a weapon before. It was not fire, not steel. It was something more. Something only humans carried. The other beasts hesitated, but only for a moment. Hunger drove them forward. Two advanced together, circling, their claws scraping against stone. The human shifted his stance, his body moving with precision. He struck one across the jaw, the blue crackle blinding in the dark, while his boot slammed into the second, sending it crashing into the cavern wall. The ground shook with the force, snow falling from above. The mother's heart pounded in her chest. Every blow, every movement from the human was not just strength, it was survival carved into his very being. He fought not for himself alone, but for her and her daughter. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. This man was not going to let them die. But the beasts were many, and the cavern shook under their rage. More shadows appeared at the edges of the torchlight, their growls merging into one terrible sound. The human glanced back at the mother, his expression hard, his voice urgent. She could not understand his words, but his meaning was clear. Run. Her legs screamed with exhaustion, but fear gave her strength. She clutched her daughter tightly and followed as he moved quickly down the tunnel. The beasts roared behind them, their heavy steps shaking the floor. The cavern narrowed ahead, ice walls closing in like the throat of some giant beast. If they could make it through, maybe the creatures would not follow. The beasts' roars grew louder again. They were closing in. The mother pressed her back against the wall, shielding her daughter, her eyes fixed on the human as he fought against time itself. Sweat ran down his brow, his muscles straining as he forced the device deeper into the ice. The sound of cracking claws grew louder, closer until she could see their glowing eyes again. The first beast lunged into the tunnel. The mother screamed. But before the creature could reach them, the human dropped the device and swung his weapon. The beast fell, its body blocking the narrow path, slowing the others. The human grabbed the device again, sparks flying as the last section of the wall gave way. Light broke through the darkness. Fresh air, bitter cold but real, spilled into the tunnel. He shouted, pointing to the opening. The mother did not hesitate. Clutching her daughter, she squeezed through the gap, stumbling into the open snow outside. The storm howled around her, blinding and violent, but the sky above was vast and free. Moments later, the human followed, shoving the device into the wall behind him. With a deafening boom, the tunnel collapsed, burying the beasts inside. The roars silenced, the cavern sealed forever. The mother fell to her knees in the snow, gasping for air, clutching her daughter tightly. She turned her head, watching as the human stood tall against the storm, his torch extinguished, his breath heavy but steady. For the first time, she realized something powerful. He had not only saved them from the storm, he had saved them from the beasts, from the cavern, from death itself. And still he had not spoken of reward. He had not asked for thanks. He simply stood there, scanning the horizon, as if already thinking of the next danger to come. The storm outside was not a storm, it was a living wall of fury. The snow beat down in sheets so heavy the mother could barely see more than a few steps ahead. Her cloak whipped violently in the wind, the fabric tearing at the seams, but she held her daughter close, shielding her face. The girl whimpered, her small arms wrapped tightly around her mother's neck, her breath shallow once again. The cavern had been a trap, but out here in the open, the world itself felt like an enemy. The human stood tall against the storm, his figure cutting through the white chaos. Snow clung to his heavy gear, ice forming across his shoulders, yet he pressed forward without hesitation. He held a device in one hand, a beacon that blinked faint light through the blizzard, guiding their way. Every few steps, he turned to check on the mother, his eyes sharp, his expression unyielding. He saw her stumbling, her strength fading, and though he said no word, she could understand his meaning was clear. Do not stop. Her body screamed at her to collapse. Her legs felt like stone. Her chest burned with each breath and her vision blurred. But each time she thought she would fall, He was there. He would grab her arm, steady her, and push her forward. She had no choice but to trust him. The snow grew deeper, climbing past her knees. Her feet were numb, her fingers stiff. The child grew heavier in her arms, though she knew it was only her own strength fading. She cried out, her voice lost in the storm. She could not go any further, and then the ground betrayed them. The ice cracked beneath her feet with a sharp snap. Before she could react, the ground gave way, plunging her downward. She screamed as she fell into darkness, clutching her daughter desperately. The fall was short but brutal, her body slamming against cold stone. Pain shot through her limbs, and for a moment she could not breathe. Above, snow and ice collapsed into the hole, sealing them in a pit of white. Panic clawed at her chest. She struggled to rise, but her body refused. Her daughter whimpered, too weak even to cry. Tears blurred the mother's vision. This was it. This was the end. But then a shadow appeared above. The human's face loomed over the edge of the pit, his torchlight cutting through the snow. His voice shouted something, fierce, carried by the storm. He did not hesitate. He threw down a cable, its end glowing faint blue. She stared at it, unsure, but he motioned urgently, telling her to grab on. Her hands shook as she wrapped the cable around her daughter first, securing her as best she could. With a sharp pull, the human lifted the child from the pit, cradling her against his chest. Relief washed over the mother, but then he lowered the cable again. This time it was for her. Her arms trembled as she reached up, her body screaming in protest. The walls of the pit were slick, the cold biting into her skin. She clung to the cable, her grip weak. Halfway up, her hand slipped and she nearly fell. A cry tore from her throat, but the human's grip tightened above, his muscles straining, as he pulled her upward with sheer force. When she finally reached the edge, she collapsed into the snow, gasping, her body shivering violently. The human pressed a small device against her chest, a heating patch that burned with sudden warmth. She flinched at first, then nearly sobbed with relief as heat spread through her frozen skin. But there was no time to rest. The storm screamed, louder, the wind carrying a sound that froze her blood. It was not the beasts from the cavern, but something else, an avalanche. A deep, rolling thunder echoed across the land as the mountain above shifted. The human's head snapped upward, his expression grim. He grabbed the child, handed her back to her mother, and motioned for them to run. The ground shook violently, snow and ice breaking loose in waves. The mother's legs barely obeyed, but she forced them to move, stumbling through the snow as the human pushed from behind. The roar grew deafening. A wall of white death thundered down the slope, chasing them with unstoppable force. She stumbled again, nearly falling, but the human seized her arm, dragging her forward. His strength was inhuman, his resolve unbreakable. Yet even he could not outrun the avalanche. The world collapsed behind them, a wall of snow and stone devouring everything. At the last moment, the human spotted a narrow crack in the cliffside. He shoved her and the child inside, throwing his own body against the opening as the avalanche struck. The sound was beyond anything she had ever known. Thunder, lightning, the scream of the earth itself. Snow slammed against him, burying the world in white. Inside the crack, the mother shielded her daughter, her heart pounding as she watched the human struggle. Snow piled higher against his back, pressing him inward, his body straining to hold it. His teeth clenched, his muscles shaking as he bore the weight of the mountain itself. She cried out, reaching for him, but he shouted something over the roar, his voice fierce, commanding. He was not asking her to help. He was telling her to hold on, and then, with one last surge of strength, he forced the snow aside, collapsing into the crack with them as the avalanche roared past. The world outside vanished under tons of ice. The storm muffled, the sound fading until only silence remained. The mother stared at him in the dim light, her chest heaving. His body shook with exhaustion, his face pale from the cold, but his eyes still burned. He had not given in. He had not allowed death to take them. In that moment, she understood. This was more than survival. This was will. This was humanity. And Though the storm outside had buried the world in snow, inside that narrow shelter hope still lived. The crack in the cliffside was silent after the avalanche. Snow pressed against the narrow opening, sealing them inside. But at least the storm's rage was muffled. The mother sat against the stone wall, clutching her daughter tightly, her heart still racing from the terror of what they had escaped. The child was breathing softly now, warmer than before, her small hands clutching the blanket the human had given. Every time her daughter's chest rose and fell, the mother whispered silent thanks. The human sat across from them, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Snow dust clung to his face, ice frozen into his hair. His body had taken the full weight of the avalanche, and yet here he was, alive, watching them with steady eyes. He pulled a small flask from his pack, drank a sip, then passed it toward her. She hesitated, her instincts still telling her to fear him. But then her daughter stirred weakly, her lips dry. The mother lifted the flask to the girl's mouth, letting her drink. Warmth spread into the child, color faintly returning to her cheeks. The mother's hands shook as she held her, realizing that once again it was this man who had saved her. Hours passed in that frozen shelter. Time blurred, broken only by the sound of wind outside and the human shifting to check his gear. At last he pressed a small device against the wall of snow blocking their exit. A low hum filled the air, and slowly, the ice melted, steam rising. Light poured in, cold but real, and the world outside revealed itself. The storm had weakened. The sky above was gray, the blizzard easing to a whisper. The land was buried under deep white snow, a frozen wasteland stretching endlessly in every direction. To the mother, it looked hopeless. No shelter, no food, no safety. But the human stood tall, scanning the horizon, and when he pointed, she followed his gaze. Far away, half buried in snow, something glowed. A beacon, a machine. Her breath caught. It was a ship. Her knees weakened with relief. Hope, real and undeniable, filled her chest. She tightened her hold on her daughter and nodded. The human adjusted his pack, picked up his torch, and began to walk. She followed without hesitation. The journey was not easy. The snow was deep, the wind biting, but this time she felt different. She was no longer stumbling in fear, no longer drowning in despair. She had someone to follow. Every time she slowed, the human looked back, his gaze enough to pull her forward again. As they drew closer, the ship revealed itself fully. It was not large, but to her eyes it was magnificent. Sleek metal, lights flickering, warmth waiting. Inside, the human climbed the ramp first, checking the controls, then turned and reached out his hand. She placed her daughter into his arms, her trust complete now before stepping inside herself. Warmth engulfed them instantly. The air was alive with heat, the lights bright against her tired eyes. The human laid the child on a padded seat, wrapping her carefully in blankets before turning to the controls. The ship hummed to life, engines stirring beneath their feet. The mother collapsed into a chair, her body shaking, tears spilling freely now. For the first time since the storm began, she allowed herself to cry. Not from fear, but from relief. Her daughter lived. They had survived. The human glanced back, his expression unreadable. He spoke softly, words she did not know, but his tone was gentle. Then he opened a compartment and pulled out food, small bars wrapped in silver. He offered one to her. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, her hands trembling as she... The taste was strange, but it filled her stomach with warmth. Her daughter stirred again, opening her eyes weakly, and the human knelt to feed her small pieces. The girl smiled faintly, the first smile the mother had seen in days. The mother's chest ached. Gratitude burned inside her like fire. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to tell him he had saved more than just lives. He had saved hope. But words failed. So instead, she pressed her hand to her chest, then reached out toward him. The gesture was simple, universal. Thank you. The human paused, then nodded slowly. His eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw not just a rescuer, but something more. A man who had carried them through death itself without asking for anything. In return, outside the storm began to fade, the gray sky giving way to light. The ship rose from the snow, lifting above the frozen wasteland. The mother watched through the window as the endless white vanished beneath them. She thought of the cavern, the beasts, the avalanche, all the death they had escaped. And she thought of the man beside her, guiding the ship with steady hands. The galaxy had always whispered that humans were dangerous, reckless, untamed. But in her heart those whispers were gone. She knew the truth now. Humans were fire in the cold, strength in despair, will unbroken even by death. As her daughter drifted into peaceful sleep for the first time in days, the mother closed her eyes, a single thought burning inside her. They had not been saved by chance, they had been saved by humanity.